Hey guys, welcome to this week's tutorial for the Duval County Math Packet for 5th grade. I'll be doing the second part of the packet beginning today on April 13th. The page I'm starting on is page 19 of your packet. Alright, the directions say multiplying decimals less than 1, and then it says to multiply. So similar to what we did last week, we're going to multiply normally as if there was no decimal. So if I have 0 and 5/10 times 3, and I'm going to ignore the decimal and just pretend I'm multiplying like 5 times 3. So 3 times 5 is 15. I write the 5 and regroup the 1. And then 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. But my product is not going to be 15 because I have to remember I wasn't multiplying by 5 wholes, I was multiplying by 5/10. So because I have one decimal place in my factor, I need to have one decimal number in my product. So I'm going to take my decimal place point and move it so that I have one digit in the decimal place. So my product is 1 and 5/10. All right, let's do one more. Number 2, 0 and 5/10 times 0 and 3/10. So I have 0 and 5/10 and then 0 and 3/10. Again, I'm going to multiply as if there was no decimal point, and then I'll figure out where my decimal goes in the product at the end. So 3 times 5 is 15 again. I write the 5 and regroup the 1. And then 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. Now I'm done with my ones place. I'm going to move into my next place over, which in this case, this was the tenths, and now I'm in the ones place. Because I'm shifting over a place, I know I'm going to put a 0 here in my first partial product to hold my place. Now I'm going to start here. 0 times 5 is 0, and 0 times 0 is 0. So because this number is a 0, my whole partial product is all zeros. All right, now I'm going to add up my two partial products. 5 plus 0 is 5. 1 plus 0 is 1. And 0 plus nothing is 0. But again, I have to think about where I'm going to place that decimal point. So this one's a little different because I have two numbers that are after the decimal. This one has 1, and this one has 1. If I do tenths times tenths, I'm going to end up with hundredths. So I need my product to have a total of two numbers that are after the decimal point. So if I shift my decimal point, it starts here and I shift it over 2 times. 1, 2, my decimal point would end up here between the 0 and the 1, which would give me 15 hundredths as my product. You notice the difference? On number 1, in my factor, I had only one decimal place number, and in my product I had 1. And then number 2, I had 2 numbers that were in decimal places, and then my product had 2 numbers that were also in decimal places. Okay, let's move on. The next page says multiplying with decimals greater than 1. The answers are mixed up at the bottom of the page. Cross out the answers as you complete the problems. So we see all the answer choices are listed at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and start number 1. This page we're going to solve exactly like we solved on the last page. All right, let's start with number 1. So I'm going to write 0 and 3/10 times 1 and 2/10. All right, starting with the place on the right, 2 times 3 is 6. And remember, I'm ignoring the decimal points for now. And then 2 times 0 is 0. Now I'm moving into this next place, so I'm going to put a 0 in my placeholder. And I like to cross mine out here to remind me, and now I'm starting here. 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 0 is 0. All right, now I'm going to add up my two partial products. 6 plus 0 is 6, 0 plus 3 is 3, and 0 plus nothing is 0. And just like before, I'm going to say how many total digits do I have that are decimal digits. So this one has 1, it has tenths, and this one has 1 tenths. So I need my product to have a total of 2 digits in the decimal place. There would be 1, so I need another one. That would be 2. So I need to place my decimal point, not here, not here, but here, so that I end up with 2 numbers in the decimal places. So my product is 0 and 36 hundredths. Okay, let's move on to number 2. 1 and 2 tenths times 0 and 4 tenths. Sorry guys, it's kind of hard to write on here. All right. First off, 4 times 2 is 8. Again, I'm ignoring the decimal points for now. And then 4 times 1 is 4. Now I'm going to move on. So I'm going to put my placeholder 0 because I'm now going to start in this column. 0 times 2 is 0. And 0 times 1 is 0. So again, because I was multiplying by 0, my whole partial product is all zeros. I'm going to add them up. 8 plus 0 is 8. 4 plus 0 is 4. And 0 plus nothing is 0. How many decimal places does my product need to have? If you said 2, you're correct. 1 decimal place here and 1 decimal place here. So there's 2 numbers that are in decimal places. So my product needs to have 2 numbers in decimal places as well. So it will be hundredths. So my product is 0 and 48 hundredths. That's a weird 4. Okay, move on to the next page. The directions on this page say, multiply to check if the student's answer is reasonable. If not, cross out the answer and write the correct quotient. And we are dividing decimals by whole numbers. So on the left, they have the division problems. And on the right, they have the student answers. And your job is to figure out if the student answers are correct or incorrect, and then correct them if they're wrong. So let's go over the first one. They started by doing 88 hundredths divided by 11. So, because this is your divisor, we know we can check division problems by multiplying the divisor by the quotient, the answer. So you see here they did 11 times 8 tenths, and they got 8 and 8 tenths, which is not what we wanted, because if you look at our dividend, the number that we were dividing up, we wanted 88 hundredths, not 8 and 8 tenths. So they noticed that the decimal place was off by 1 place. How did they know that the answer needed to be 8 hundredths then? Well, let's check. So if we did 11, I'm going to do what they did. 11 times 8 tenths. Ooh, it's hard to write on here. Okay. And I did 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 1 is 8. Now I'm moving into my next place. So I'm done here. I'm going to put my 0. All right, now 0 times 1 is 0. And 0 times the other one is 0. Again, because I was multiplying by zeros, my whole row of numbers is still zeros. And then 8, 8, 0. All right. What they did is they said, okay, well, if my answer was 0 and 8 tenths, if the decimal was here, then my decimal would be here in my product. But I don't want my decimal to be there. I want my decimal to be between the 0 and the 8. So in order for my decimal to end up here, between the 0 and the 8, I needed to have 1, 2 decimal numbers. So I could change that up here by, instead of doing 0 and 8 tenths, doing 0.08 or 8 hundredths. So that's how they knew the answer was 8 hundredths. They knew the decimal place needed to be 1 place over to the left, so that my product would have 2 decimal places. And I couldn't change the 11 because that was given in the problem. So all I could change is the student answer part. Let's try another one like that. Let's do number 2. So we have 5 and 6 tenths divided by 8. And they're saying the answer is 7 hundredths. We're going to check it by multiplication. So again, we're going to multiply our divisor by our quotient and see if we get 5 and 6 tenths, or a dividend. Okay, so 8 times 0 and 7 hundredths. I'm going to do this over here to the side. So I'm going to write the longer number on top, 0 and 7 hundredths. And I want to multiply that by 8. And I want to see if I get 5 6/10, or 5.6. Okay, 8 times 7 is 56. So 6, and then I regroup my 5. 8 times 0 is 0, plus 5 is 5. And then 8 times 0 is 0. So I end up with 0, 5, 6, which is, I do want 5 and 6, but I want my decimal point to be between my 5 and 6. If I was to use this number, I would have 1, 2 decimal places, which means my product would need to have 1, 2 decimal places, and it would put my decimal point right here. 0 and 56 hundredths is not the same as 5 and 6/10, so this one is wrong. I would want my decimal place to be between the 5 and the 6, so I want to have 5 and 6/10. So in order for my decimal point to go here, this decimal point would have to be shifted over one place to here, so that I only have tenths in my factor. So instead of 7 hundredths, it should be 7 tenths. All right, and then you can continue through that page. The last page of our packet this week is dividing by hundredths. Let's look at number 1. It says divide, and I have 1 whole divided by 25 hundredths. There's a couple of different ways that you can solve these type of problems, but I like to turn them into fractions and think of them that way. So if I was to think of this as a fraction, I could think of it as 1 divided by 25 hundredths, like this. And I know this is true because if I was to have 1/4, for instance, that would be like taking a 1 whole and dividing it into 4. So this would be 1 whole divided by 25 hundredths, which is what I want. All right. In order to make this simpler, I could make my fraction into an equivalent fraction that doesn't have any decimals in it by multiplying by a multiple of 10, like 10, 100, or 1,000, depending on how many times I need to move this decimal point. In order to make 25 hundredths a whole number to get rid of that decimal point, I would want the decimal point to move 1, 2 places to the right. That would be the same as multiplying it by 100. If I was to multiply it by 10, it would shift 1 time. If I multiply it by 100, it shifts 2 times. If I multiply it by 1,000, it would shift 3 times. Because it's a fraction and I have to keep it equivalent, if I multiply the denominator by 100, I have to multiply the numerator by 100 as well. So my new fraction would be 1 times 100 is 100. And then for my denominator, ooh, that's a little messy. Let's try that again. 100. And then my denominator, 25 hundredths times 100 is 25. Because I just shifted my decimal point 1, 2 places. You should remember that from the beginning of the school year. Now I end up with 100 divided by 25. Oh, I know how to do that. So I'm going to come over here to the side and do 100 divided by 25. And I'm going to do it 2 different ways because I know you guys use 2 different strategies in class. The first one I'm going to use is partial quotients. You probably learned this in 4th grade. With partial quotients, you think to yourself, and I like to think of it as maybe people and buses. So if I have 100 people and they're getting onto 25 buses, how many people can I put on each bus? I could start by putting, let's say I know 25 times 2 is 50 because I'm thinking of quarters. So I could put 2 people on each bus. 2 groups of 25 is 50. Now I'm going to subtract out how many people are left to put on buses. 100 minus 50 is 50. And I just did this regrouping mentally in my head. Now I have 50 people left and I have 25 buses. I can put 2 more people onto each bus. 2 groups of 25 is 50. Again, I'm going to subtract out to see how many people are left. 50 minus 50 is 0. Over here, I'm going to draw a line because I'm now done dividing because I have 0 left over. And I'm going to say how many people did I put on each bus. At first, I put 2, and then I put 2 more. 2 plus 2 is 4. So my answer to number 1 is 4.